You aren't a king. Not yet. You're a 9-year-old boy standing over your father's body on the steppe, and the only thing you feel is cold. His name was Yesuge. He was poisoned at a feast by a rival tribe, and he didn't make it home. One day you have a father, the next day you have nothing. The clan that followed him scatters within hours. They take the horses, they take the food, they leave your family on the frozen grass because that is what you do with a dead chief's orphans out here. You are not worth the trouble. You are barely worth a second glance. This is just the beginning. You don't have a talent for fighting, not yet. What you have is something rarer and more dangerous out here. You notice things. You notice which horses eat less and travel farther. You notice how many arrows a man can carry before his draw arm gives out. You notice how a frozen river can move an army in 3 days across terrain that would take 3 weeks on open ground. You are the kid, tracking grazing routes and memorizing water sources while everyone else is arguing about bloodlines and honor. Honor doesn't feed you, details do. Details keep you alive on a steppe that kills the inattentive before the first snow falls. The real shift happens when you realize the steppe isn't run by warriors, it's run by alliances, by blood oaths, by the invisible paperwork of tribal loyalty. Every clan out here is playing a game of shifting promises and convenient betrayals, and the man who wins isn't the strongest. He's the man who understands exactly who owes what to whom and who's already planning to switch sides. You learn that game faster than anyone teaches it to you. You start with nothing, a handful of loyal followers, a reputation and a few good horses. You trade horses for men. You trade men for a bigger alliance. You offer the right chief the right deal at exactly the right moment, and you unite clans that had been killing each other for generations. You save the day. You unite the Mongols. You feel the adrenaline. It's better than the hunger. But being the Great Khan isn't a destination, it's a starting line. You have unified the Mongols, and now a united nation needs somewhere to go. The steppe can only feed so many mouths, so many horses. You are managing a supply chain that starves if it stops moving. Conquest isn't ambition out here. Conquest is logistics. The first thing you do isn't ride to war. You build a machine, because you have figured out something every empire before you missed. It doesn't matter how many men you have if they can't move faster than your enemy can think. A slow army is just a city that hasn't found its walls yet. You set up relay stations across the entire continent, horse stations spaced a full day's ride apart, running from the Chinese border all the way to Eastern Europe. A message enters the system on the steppe and arrives in Persia in 3 days. Modern empires would call this a telegraph. You call it the yam. It lets information outrun any army. You know where your enemies are before they know you're moving. An empire that communicates faster than it can march never loses the initiative. But that's not even the most dangerous part. You discover the real cargo isn't weapons, it's knowledge. You conquer a city in northern China and you don't burn the engineers. You absorb them. You move them across half a continent embedded inside your army, indistinguishable from servants or scribes. They look harmless in transit, lethal on arrival. Place those siege engineers outside a city wall in Hungary, and every castle in Europe becomes a paper box. You hire generals who drink fermented mare's milk for breakfast. A man named Subutai, who campaigns in temperatures that would kill ordinary soldiers on the march, who reads terrain the way a merchant reads a ledger. He can move an army of 100,000 across a Russian winter and hit his target within a day of when he promised. He doesn't speak the languages of the countries he destroys. He doesn't need to. He speaks logistics. You give your generals the mission, the resources, and then you get out of the way. You trust the system over your own ego. That is the rarest thing a conqueror has ever done. Cities try to resist. Most don't survive it. But you discover something more powerful than a battering ram. The rumor of your arrival. Sometimes you don't even need to attack. You let word travel ahead of you that the army is on the road. That is enough. Whole garrisons abandon their walls. Governors send tribute before they spot a single rider on the horizon. Fear is the most efficient weapon ever invented, and your name does half the work your cavalry does. You move through civilizations the way fire moves through dry grass, not because you're unstoppable, because everything in your path was already waiting for a reason to fall. Charismatic kings in silk robes arrive at your camp quoting ancient philosophy while their servants unload carts of treasure onto your threshold. They offer gold and titles and their daughters. Their scholars scramble to explain you in terms their civilization can understand, because what you're doing doesn't fit into any category they have. One calls you the wrath of God. Another calls you the universal ruler. A Persian poet writes an elegy about your passing before you're even gone. You don't correct any of them. You live a life nobody in history has ever lived. A tent full of gold from half a dozen dynasties, silk from China, glass from Persia, furs from the Russian north. You have generals commanding armies in 4 countries simultaneously, all reporting through the yam. You can redirect a force of 50,000 men with a single message carried by a relay rider who hasn't slept in 2 days. You have a go bag, essentially, except your go bag is a continent. And you want more. You stop thinking about land. Land is a tax problem. Land is something a bureaucrat in a silk robe argues about for a generation before anyone benefits. What you want is permanence. Something they can't redraw on a map. Something that outlasts every treaty and every burned archive and every dynasty that rises and falls in your wake. You figure out the most irreversible form of ownership in history. You take wives from every royal line you conquer, hundreds of them, concubines from every city that surrenders. This is not excess for its own sake. It is strategy at a scale nobody has ever attempted. You are running the most aggressive expansion of a single genetic line ever recorded, and you understand exactly what you're doing. DNA is the only title deed that never requires a court to enforce it. You cannot seize it back. You cannot treaty it away. You cannot burn it like a library. It moves silently through generations long after every palace you ever built has crumbled to nothing. 800 years from now, geneticists will map the Y chromosome of men living across Central Asia, China, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe, and they will find a single marker so widespread it should be statistically impossible. 1 in every 200 men on Earth carries a specific genetic signature that traces back to a single man on the Mongolian steppe in the 12th century. You. That is not a legacy. That is a biological monopoly. But then the paranoia sets in. You never sit with your back to the entrance of the tent. You have your food tasted before every meal, the way your father did not. You change the position of your sleeping quarters with no pattern anyone can predict. You watch the faces of the men closest to you with the same intensity you once used to track horses, looking for the small change in behavior that means something has shifted. Because you know better than anyone that empires don't fall from outside. They collapse from within. You built this machine. You know exactly where the weak joints are. You've ordered things no one writes honestly. The memory of it doesn't wash away. It sits behind your eyes during quiet nights on the steppe. You tell yourself it was never gentle out here, that without you, someone crueler would have come, that this is just the cost of building something that lasts. Maybe, but it was still you who gave the orders. The campaigns get harder. Your body is not the body that survived the frozen steppe at 9 years old. The decades of riding have done their work. One morning during a hunt, you fall from your horse. You tell no one what it means, but you know. The dying is quiet. The great fear isn't death. The great fear is what happens after. Your enemies are still out there. Every king you humiliated, every dynasty you shattered, every court that still carries your name like an open wound. They can't reach you while you're breathing, but the knowledge you hold, every route, every alliance, every mechanism the empire runs on, that belongs to whoever finds it next. You are the whole map. And maps are dangerous things to leave lying around. So you make one final logistical decision. Your burial site will remain a secret. Every soldier who carries the cart, every man who walks the road, every witness to the procession will be killed. All of them. You are not being cruel. You are being efficient. The most dangerous thing in the world is information in the wrong hands, and you are not about to let your death become a road for your enemies to travel. They say the riders drove 10,000 horses over the ground to erase every trace of disturbed Earth. Nobody finds you, not then, not now. 8 centuries later, your burial site is still a blank space on the map. On that last night, sitting alone in your tent while the machine you built hums somewhere in the dark outside, you wonder if you'd trade all of it. The yam, the generals, the silk, the genetic signature planted across half a continent that no treaty will ever unwind. For one morning back on the frozen steppe, before your father died, when you were just a quiet boy who noticed things nobody else bothered to track. You gave the world something it was too frightened to build for itself, and it took everything. The machine runs without you now. That was always the plan.